Hello everyone. So we're continuing on the topic of history of oil wells, and I mentioned the first one was first commercial oil well was drilled in Titusville, Pennsylvania by Edwin Drake in AD 1859, and the reason that they drilled with this wellbore was based on the evidence of oil seep on the surface. Now, later in 1890s, a guy named Patillo Higgins promoted a drilling site near Beaumont, Texas. And the reason he selected was due to the features of the surface, which was a dome. And he started drilling extensively during the 1890s, and he couldn't find oil. Then he sold his properties to a guy named Anthony Lucas, and he continued drilling and drilling deeper, and he found that there is oil underground, and that was the start of discovery of a Spindletop well. So this was a change in the history of oil industry, because the reason that they drilled that wellbore was the location of the surface, not the oil seep on the surface. So they didn't initially see any oil on the surface, but based on the geology of the surface, they were deciding to drill a wellbore. So the depth of this wellbore was 1,000 feet, and it's in Beaumont, Texas. Well was drilled in 1901 by Anthony Lucas, and the rate of production was much higher, 100,000 barrels of oil per day. So this is a chart you can see which summarize the modern oil industry. Started in AD 60 with the Drake well, then Spindletop discovery well, which was the well that we just discussed, and then the oil was discovered in Iran in 1908, and then in Iraq, then in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and Algeria, Nigeria, and then OPEC was created, which is OPEC is an association of countries that are producing oil. So it's basically the organization of petroleum exporting countries, and it has 13 nations, and it was founded in 1960, and there are a couple of countries which are member of OPEC. US is not a member of OPEC, but that's an organization of petroleum producing countries. So a couple of pictures about drilling. This is a drilling well site in early 90s, early 1900s, and Roughnecks crew on a drilling rig. This seems to be a rotary drilling, which we will discuss later on. These are the rigs in early oil fields, and they were wooden. These days they are made of steel, of course, and you can see how many rigs they drilled and over there. So let's continue and talk about blowout. So what does blowout means? Blowout means that so the oil that is underground is at very high pressure, and if you can't control the flow of oil to the surface, it's a huge pressure drop for oil. For example, let's say the oil in the reservoir is at a pressure of 5,000 psi, and then you connect this huge pressure to the surface, which is atmospheric pressure 14 psi, and this huge pressure difference causes the oil to blow out. And if you can't control it, if you don't control it, blowout happens. Okay, so it's uncontrolled flow of formation fluid, oil and gas, to the surface. Now in old basically petroleum industry, it was very common thing to happen, and they actually built dams to collect the oil, and it was an environmental disaster. Now in modern days they try to control it, which we'll try hopefully to talk about it, how, what methods, and you will learn more about it also in the drilling engineering course. So this is called blowout, and some ways that in the old days they were controlling this was by combining the by mixing the nitric acid with sulfuric acid and glycerin and create a mixture which was very powerful explosive, and it was used in oil wells to fight. And when they did this explosion, they basically reduced the amount of oxygen in the air, which is one part of the fire triangle, right? So if you don't have oxygen, then there will not be any explosion. So they did the explosion, they reduced the amount of oxygen in the air, and then they prevented the blowout to explode actually. Another picture here, this is in California, heavy oil, and it's in Huntington Beach. Looks crazy, right? It's close to the beach, and you can see how many wells they drilled there in old days. And the California heavy oil, the drill wells should be very close to each other, and that's why you see a lot of these derricks in this area. So to summarize this part, we talked about the history of oil, started in 6,000 years ago with primitive oil industry and how it transformed into the modern oil industry. And we talked about the modern oil industry, which started in 1859 with the Drake well in Pennsylvania, based on the surface oil seep, and then Spindletop discovery in 1901 was the major industry milestone, which was basically the drilling location on a dome and based on the location. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about some statistics of oil industry.